The Mariners have a tough question to ask going into 2025, and that's what to do about the final roster spot on this team. As of right now, we think it's probably taken up by Mitch Haniger. But there are some other guys I think have a really good chance at taking that spot from Mitch, and we're going to talk about that in today's video.
Bolton, the first one, I think I'd like to propose, have a seat at the table, a quite large seat it might be.
It's messed up.
Hey, as another big guy, I don't think Rowdy would be opposed. I mean, he literally celebrated his double in the game in Peoria. Was it yesterday, technically?
Yep, yep.
Where I slapped at his tummy.
It's true.
Rowdy Tellez, first baseman, obviously was signed. The most recent signing to the position player core, I think,
Mhm.
was like what last week. Obviously, Rayleigh was on paternity leave, so maybe that's why he was getting the bulk of the opportunity while Rayleigh was out. He's already seen 14 AB or 13 ABs, hit a homer in his first game, but I think outside of that, it's only his double that he has as well as another hit. He's batting 154 in spring. He's a left-handed first baseman. Do I think his rosters that his like what he provides is more valuable than Mitch Haniger? I think given the position and the depth of position at which Mitch Haniger plays for the Mariners, specifically in the Major League roster, Rowdy has a conversation. There's a conversation to be had, but I don't think he's necessarily at the top of the list given how he's performed, and also I think service time. I think will have something to do with it. Rowdy's not going to have options. Some
Right.
of the other guys might have some to allow a bit more roster flexibility in the future.
Yeah, I think the biggest problem is that in the outfield, obviously you have the three starters in Randy, Julio, and Victor Robles. You also have Luke Raley playing first base, who's an outfielder by trade, and you have Dylan Moore that can go play the outfield for you if you need him to. So, yeah, you're paying Mitch $17 million, but that roster spot could be used to create so much more depth and flexibility. If you were to go with someone like Tellez, because again, right now you have an outfielder playing first base for you, and you have Donovan Solano as well. We know he's not a great defender. Not to say that Rowdy is, but we kind of know what you're going to get out of Rowdy Tellez. He's been doing it for years now. He's going to give you some decent pop. He's going to give you some good vibes. He's not going to hit 300 or anything like that, but he's another guy that's actually a natural first baseman that I think makes sense to have over there. Joe, who's the next guy on our list?
A natural third, first, doesn't really matter. Colby Patnode's dream Mariners player, Austin Shenton, acquired at the beginning of the offseason, can play both corner infield spots, is left-handed, so I think that's another addition to what he can provide as opposed to Mitch. But you said Rowdy's not hitting 300 in spring training. Austin Shenton's currently hitting 308 in his 13 at bats. Austin Shenton, do I think he's got a better chance than Rowdy Tellez? I really do. I think that the Mariners went back out there and acquired him for a good reason. Do I think that a competitive team would necessarily roster a guy like Austin Shenton? Maybe. I think it depends on how deep those two positions are at third and first to allow you to roster a guy like him. But the Mariners don't really have that top end depth, I think, when you're looking at third base and first base on this roster. As you mentioned, Luke Raley, he's an outfielder playing first base. No discredit to Luke Raley and his body of work, what he did for the Mariners at first base for the large part of 2024 out of necessity. He's going to get the bulk of the opportunity there. But then you look at third base and it's Jorge Polanco, it's Donovan Solano, it's Dylan Moore, it's Ryan Bliss. Like it's a ragtag group of trying to piece it all together. How does Austin Shenton fit into that? He very well could. It's just you'd wish that there was a bit more stability at the top to allow for Shenton to just be more of a bench bat, as opposed to if he does make the opening day roster, he hits his way onto it. It's likely because they figure, hey, let's see what this guy can actually do on a semi-regular basis, as opposed to we know what we're getting out of him. He's going to get 150, 200 at bats, maybe plate appearances instead of at bats there. But regardless, Shenton, it seems like a guy that if he does make the roster, it's going to be because he continues to hit throughout the rest of spring, not because they value what he has as a player overall, like his overall like makeup, his like body of work.
Yeah, I think that the big part is, and I think it's something we probably should have prefaced here at the beginning, is how the Mariners roster is currently constructed. The Mariners usually go with 13 pitchers and 13 position players. And because of that, it leaves you with four spots on your bench. One of them's probably going to have to be Mitch Garver, unless he's DHing that day, of course. One of them's going to be Leo Rivas. One of them, well, potentially Leo Rivas, right? Who else is on that bench?
Donovan Solano.
Donovan Solano, if he's not starting that day. And then you're going to have Mitch Haniger or one of these other guys that we're talking about here. So again, Mitch Garver's probably in the game, so like maybe that's another spot there. It's interesting to see how it's going to all shake out because one of Solano or Rayleigh's going to have to be on the bench every single day. Another guy, like if Ryan Bliss makes the team, then he would have to be on the bench unless he's starting. And Dylan Moore's over there playing third at the start of the year because who knows how Polanco's knee's doing at the time of recording this. He's been in one game, so that's just yeah, that we don't know what's going to happen with Jorge Polanco going into 2025. But the next guy on our list, Joe, is Leo Rivas.
Who hasn't really seen a lot of action. He's had one at bat.
Really?
Only one at bat. I think what's happening is they're giving Moore and Ryan Bliss, I think, the bulk of the work in the middle infield to start because they kind of know what they have with Leo Rivas.
Yeah.
I think they know that they have a switch hitting, contact first kind of bat that can flick a ball around anywhere in the infield or anywhere in the outfield. Not with great power, but maybe with some great responsibility, if you will. And he's shorthanded with the glove, right? We know that with Leo Rivas. That's kind of where his, I guess, value lies. We saw it last year when JP and, like, we don't really need to go into too much depth, I think, about what Leo Rivas can provide. Is a low ceiling, high floor type of utility infielder on your bench. And on roster resource, according to Fangraphs right now, he is on the roster as it stands over a guy like Ryan Bliss, who I think him and like Rivas and Bliss are one in the same conversation of utility infielder that do similar-ish roles, but we know the tail of the tape is that Bliss is just a bit more electric. He's got a bit more pop to what he can provide. And so far in spring, I mentioned that him and Dylan Moore beginning, I think, the majority of the run at second base. I mean, Bliss in 13 ABs, he's hitting 300 with a 923 OPS. He hasn't hit a homer yet, but we all know the story from Bliss coming over from the Diamondbacks is he is a small, pound-for-pound champ at second base, similar to like an Altuve type, where he's a guy that's going to run into some baseballs because that's just how much power he can kind of generate, but he also has a ton of speed. Bliss is the upside play. He's the guy that if he's hot coming out of spring, he makes the roster solely because he's going to win you a game or two at the beginning of the year based on his skill set. If he's cold, Leo Rivas makes the roster because of he's not going to lose you any games necessarily, right?
Yeah, I think that Bliss is a guy that makes a lot of sense to be on this roster to start the year. He's a guy that some people are pounding the table for to actually be the starting second baseman at the beginning of the year. I mean, Dylan Moore, was he 0 for 13?
Over 14.
Oh, yikes. Oh gosh, whose narrative is that pushing? I think Bliss was taking reps over at third base. Haven't seen it in a game yet, I don't think, him playing third, but I think that if he's able to work on that positional flexibility, be able to play some other spots in the infield, I would be shocked if we didn't see him get a run in the outfield a little bit at some point too.
Mm-hmm.
Like
He did in Tacoma last year.
right. So yeah, so basically turning him into what Dylan Moore has been over the past few years, so Dylan Moore can step into more of a starting role, I think would be pretty important for this team. Another guy that came over in that trade, Joe, is Dominic Canzone, and he's had a pretty good spring so far.
I mean, he's hitting 286 in his opportunities, 14 ABs. Hasn't popped a homer, but in the game in Peoria on Monday, two ABs, two doubles, one scalded at 114 miles an hour, apparently. Dom Canzone, it's such a hard conversation to have because I feel like we had this conversation last year because he played so well in spring. He beat Luke Rayleigh out for the starting left field job on opening day. And he just looked like the better player coming out of camp. And then he was okay to start the year. He was doing pretty well. And then obviously ran into the wall, injured his collarbone, and was out. And then never really found his footing again. He's been working with a cricket paddle. He's wearing some Oakley goggles up at the dish.
That's right.
Maybe it's something to do with his vision, whatever, any sort of change that he's making. It's working so far in spring. If he is a guy that the Mariners still value as if he's a quad A outfielder that's going to see 200 at-bats a year, maybe pop 10 homers, that's not a bad thing.
Mm-mm.
It's just you dreamed on his ceiling being a bit higher because of how well he was able to hit across all the minor league levels. It just hasn't materialized in the big leagues yet. If he can transition some of the success in the spring in the last 2 years into, again, not a full 162 campaign, because he's not going to see the bulk of the ABs given the depth of the outfield. But I would rather Dom Canzone get 250 at-bats than Mitch Haniger in 2025, just based around what I think that they'll give the team in 2025. With that being said, Haniger's looked great in batting practice, off the machine, off of some soft toss. Like, he's been good. It's just, will it translate to the game level?
Yeah, I think it's tough. I think that in the end, Mitch Haniger is going to be on this team. I
Mhm.
think one way or another he will be on this team, and I think that he's the one that's going to get that final roster spot that we're talking about because he's owed so much money, because he's a vocal leader. He's been there, done that with this team, and at this point, like you either cut bait on him and eat $17 million, or you hope that he can regain something in 2025 by only being a DH, not having to play the outfield. Like Haniger has a relatively low floor at this point because we saw how bad he was last year, but I feel like his ceiling is still kind of there. Like we've seen him crush some baseballs this spring. He's looked really good this spring, at least on the backfields. And so I think that that is where the Mariners are going to go with it. But let us know in the comments down below what you think the Mariners should do with that last spot, and go Mariners.
It's going to Laz.
Amen.